I'm Olin Adams, and I am recording this presentation from the campus of Auburn University, and within that, the Louder Building and the Harvard College of Business. The presentation title is The Path to Pay. I'm not Hemingway, but I think through the course of this presentation we'll find to whom the pay goes and for whom the bell tolls. First, we'll look at the origins of amateur athletics. Through much of the 20th century, the National Collegiate Athletic Association and its member institutions made a sincere, largely altruistic effort to promote academic values in intercollegiate athletics. However, the Southeastern Conference broke with the tradition of pure amateurism and permitted members to award athletic scholarships. The now defunct Big 8 Conference followed suit. In 1948, the NCAA attempted to restrict scholarship aid for athletes to financial need through a measure colloquially known as the Sanity Code. 3 years later, its membership repealed the bylaw. In an address to the quarterback club in Knoxville, Tennessee, September 27, 1965, Bill Reed, the commissioner of the Big Ten, speaking on an open date week for Tennessee, credited the SEC for its seminal role in the establishment of the grant and aid, of which no more than 30 could be awarded in football. Amateurism was an expected norm until the last decade, but the economic position of college athletics has been evolving for more than half a century. The first great revenue stream for college football, and indeed for college athletics, was ticket sales for football games. The prospect of gate receipts catalyzed the building boom of the 1920s and stadium expansion in later decades. Basketball provided a positive segment margin on many campuses with moderate revenue and a squad size much smaller than football. Above all, that sport would demonstrate the potential of college athletics for increased revenue from media rights. The NCAA basketball tournament did not have a national television contract until 1969. It was in syndication prior to that, when NBC paid $500,000 for exhibition of the championship game, a split coverage of the national semifinals, 2 regional finals, and 2 first-round games. ESPN was launched in 1979 and acquired the rights to early round play effective 1981. This led to a change from NBC to CBS in 1982 for the principal contract, which by then brought $16 million. The current contract, a joint venture among the NCAA, CBS, and Turner, which began in 2011, was then valued at $770 million per year. So we can see not only the increase in the number of games broadcast, but the tremendous increase in the value of the contract across just 42 years, increasing by a factor of more than 1,500. While bowls possessed authority over postseason football revenue, the NCAA exercised tight control of the television contract for regular season football beginning in 1951, limiting both the total number of games and appearances by individual members. Sensing the opportunity cost, in other words, the money left on the table, the principal conferences other than the Big Ten and Pacific 10 had formed in 1979 a consortium, the College Football Association, CFA, to pursue their economic interests. As representative plaintiffs for the CFA, the universities of Oklahoma and Georgia brought an antitrust action against the NCAA. Affirming decisions of the lower courts, the United States Supreme Court found the NCAA television plan restricted price and output, and rejected the NCAA's asserted pro-competitive justifications for the plan. I commend your reading not only this case, but the trial court case, the federal court for the Western District of Oklahoma, which called the NCAA a classic cartel, an epithet which holds to this day. The case marked a watershed in the commercialization of football and of college athletics in general, leading to an explosion of television revenue and exposure to the public. Moreover, this increased media coverage drove conference realignment. The first phase of realignment was attributable to expansions which made possible conference championship football games. Under the NCAA rule, a conference had to have 12 members to divide into a conference championship game, and that accounted for expansion from, in most cases, 10 members. Later realignment redrew the map of intercollegiate athletics as conferences sought members less for geographic coherence or common institutional mission than to improve the bargaining power of the leagues for media rights. We'll turn to Coaching compensation. Well into the 20th century, the compensation of college coaches, even in revenue-generating sports, was generally within the broad parameters of senior professors and chief executive officers of institutions. In 1982, Texas A&M broke sharply from that pattern when it signed University of Pittsburgh head football coach Jackie Sherrill to the same position at College Station for a contract valued at $1.7 million, or more than $280,000 per year. It was the highest compensation ever paid any university employee in the history of American higher education to that date. In 1995, Bobby Bowden, head football coach at Florida State University, became the first head football coach with an annual salary of $1 million. Today, seven-figure annual compensation is commonplace among head football coaches and head basketball coaches in major athletic conferences. Moreover, many offensive and defensive coordinators at leading football programs make in excess of $1 million per year. As we look at the phenomenon of negotiation for coaching salaries, the most successful coach commands the highest market value, and competitor institutions offer compensation somewhat below the leader to their coach. The result has been to overvalue less accomplished coaches and to inflate coaching salaries. The NCAA has attempted with little success to limit the coaching expenditures of its members. In 1975, the association adopted a bylaw that placed a maximum on the number of assistant coaches in football and men's basketball. When two coaches at the University of Alabama brought an antitrust action against the NCAA, the Fifth Circuit found a pro-competitive justification for the bylaw, Hennessy v. NCAA, 1977. While the 1975 initiative failed to stem the rising tide of coaching compensation, at least it passed judicial muster. A later effort did not. In 1991, the NCAA enacted a bylaw that established a maximum salary for restricted earnings coaches, i.e. entry-level coaches in basketball. The U.S. District Court for Kansas found no pro-competitive justification for the bylaw and concluded that the measure restrained trade. And that case was Law and Others, not the subject matter, but the chief plaintiff was Law, v. National Collegiate Athletic Association, 1995. Not only has the compensation of coaches reached entertainment industry levels, the distance between coaches and the academy has been growing. Early coaches often resembled in intellect and temperament professors and university presidents. Yost, McGugan, and Kavanaugh, you can read those names on Google if you're not familiar with them, all had some background in law and either taught it or practiced it concurrent to their coaching. Later coaches rarely mixed practice or teaching of a profession with coaching, but were Renaissance men who brought a cerebral approach to coaching. We think of men like Rockne and Neeland and Wooden and Smith, Dean Smith, since Smith's a common name. Contemporary coaches tend to be focused on recruiting and on X's and O's. In paradox, they appear less worldly, even as their players tend more to political activism than in earlier times. While conferences, universities, coaches, and administrators proved beneficiaries of the newfound wealth, players were limited to athletic scholarships. The most successful challenge for revenue sharing was an antitrust action led by former UCLA basketball star Ed O'Bannon and others, resulting in stipends paid to athletes for cost of attendance. NCAA v. O'Bannon and others, Ninth Circuit, 2015. However, the Ninth Circuit reversed in that case the portion of district court holding that would have allowed the payment of deferred compensation to athletes. The NCAA then granted members of the Atlantic Coast, Big Ten, Big 12, Pacific 12, and Southeastern conferences, known commonly as the Power Five, autonomy from the balance of Division I membership, freeing those conferences and their members to implement new policies. Although most of the legal challenges to the NCAA policies on amateurism have been antitrust claims, Northwestern football players pursued a labor law claim seeking to form a union. In 2014, Peter Sung Orr, director of the Chicago-based Region 13 office of the National Labor Relations Board, determined the players were employees. He distinguished the case from a prior challenge by Brown University graduate assistants who were held to be students, citing both the recruitment of the Northwestern players for football and the extensive time commitment to the sport in season and the off season. The National Board in Washington, D.C., however, vacated the decision, holding that union recognition would create chaos in the college football labor market. The board stressed that most of the Power Five conference members are public institutions with labor law provisions set by their respective states. Hence, a decision for a limited number of private universities would harm the sport. That was Northwestern University v. College Athlete Players Association and the appeal to the NLRB was heard in 2015. We move then to name, image, likeness, much in the news lately. The California legislature made a bold stroke in the path to athlete pay, enacting in 2019 the Fair Pay to Play Act. The measure permits college athletes in the state to receive income for the use of their names, images, and likenesses, known for short as NIL, a right held by most Olympic athletes for a quarter century. The states of Colorado and Florida also enacted NIL legislation, the latter, i.e. Florida, effective July 2021. And with that early an implementation, it forces the hand of schools and other bodies that would regulate NIL. However, the NCAA at its January 2021 convention declined to formulate policy on NIL implementation and left the matter to uncertain action by Congress. NCAA v. Alston. In December 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court granted certiorari in the National Collegiate Athletic Association v. Alston, an antitrust case which challenges the NCAA limit on athlete compensation to the value of an athletic scholarship. The NCAA petitions from decisions of the Federal District Court and U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit that its current limit on compensation to tuition fees, room, board, books, and stipends for cost of attendance violates antitrust law. Oral arguments in the case are scheduled for March 31st, 2021, hence just a few days after this conference convenes virtually. Let's move to reform topics. And first, stratification. Reform of intercollegiate athletics might not be as complex as some observers believe. Even with what is, at first impression, an elegant and reasonably dynamic classification system, the NCAA maintains massive divisions of athletic programs with highly disparate resources. Moreover, the system is infused with outmoded values of competitive equity and recruiting equity, terms of art within the NCAA, based on monolithic assumptions for those divisions. We mean by monolith cut out of the same block or stone, i.e., that's the assumption, but indeed they're not all the same, because even within a group no larger than the 65 members of the Power Five, there are substantial differences in resources. For the solution to their problems in this respect, college athletics could look to the same place they recruit their players, secondary schools. Although California has only 4 competitive divisions, Texas has 6, and Florida has 8. Alabama, a state contiguous to Florida and average in population, has 7 divisions. A further stratification of competition could serve college athletics well. Strong teams from conferences other than the Power Five, Big East, and American Athletic might value their own basketball tournament, in which the chance of a championship would be much higher. I concede the existence of Gonzaga, which is the top-ranked team in America as we record, but it is alone among the top 20 in terms of members outside the Power Five, Big East, and American Athletic. We don't pick up any other conferences until we reach between 21 and 25, and there are others receiving votes. Yet it is a disturbance in the tradition of the NCAA tournament that is most likely to start a nuclear war in college athletics. The association depends on its billion-dollar revenues and would fight attempts to separate teams from the Power Five. Hence, the Knight Commission offered a concession of separating only FBS football from the NCAA. However, in my mind, FBS football and men's basketball at the highest level are very similar in terms of their economic status. A new competitive structure consisting of the current Power Five, Group of Five, FCS, Division II, and Division III split in two based on enrollment would serve college athletics better, in my view, than the present system. Above all, such a new system would reflect the economic realities of today. Beyond reform, redistribution. For Division III, Division II, FCS, and Group of Five members, amateurism is not merely preferable, but the only option they can afford. Although there is a variance in resources even within the Power Five, most institutions can afford to pay athletes. Large expenditures for coaching and facilities have given the false appearance of a low surplus operation. In fact, many have ample resources. 2 members of the SEC, Auburn and South Carolina, executed 8-figure buyouts of head football coaches, even during the pandemic. With an eye to redistribution, how might NIL and compensation of athletes by their institutions be distributed? The NIL concept is by definition a manifestation of market behavior. The market provides revenue and must guide its distribution. Salaries and other compensation for playing team sports, which might arise based on the holding in Alston, present more complications, but a modified market basis is likely the best answer. Accounting for athletics has fallen into the same trap as accounting for industry. Reporting is too aggregated, as Johnson and Kaplan pointed out in their classic work, Relevance Lost in 1991. Hence, the profitability of athletic teams often is in doubt. However, Strupek, Milani, and Murphy in 1993 suggested a managerial accounting methodology for college athletics. That was nearly 3 decades ago, and their per sport analysis would give us a better handle on team profitability. More recently, Lawrence, Gabriel, and Tuttle in 2010 have advocated the use of activity-based costing in athletics. With the motivation of a new paradigm for athlete compensation, there is a way to determine team profitability. Individual contributions are also hard to assess, but we get some ideas from both playing time and professional draft status. While athletes with substantial playing time on revenue-generating sports teams would be expected to receive the majority of compensation, a minimum salary for players in non-revenue sports should be considered. This should apply to men and women. The new compensation system for players should serve an additional salutary purpose. While antitrust litigation failed to reverse the spiral of coaching compensation, and excise taxes also have proved a weak deterrent, the sharing of institutional revenues with athletes should be effective in the redistribution of resources away from overpaid coaches. And I do touch on the tax-exempt status of organizations in this in the accompanying manuscript, which I hope will be a forthcoming book. We turn to the last topic in reform, that of governance, and go way back to the Federalist Papers, classic work at the origin of the American Republic, and from Federalist 51, Madison's quotation, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." Madison's quotation reminds us that a vacuum in leadership is unacceptable. The NCAA has defended amateurism by fighting most antitrust actions and other proposals for athlete rights. Yet the pandemic exposed the most impoverished leadership by the association. On May 8, 2020, NCAA President Mark Emmert announced that there would be no sports without students on campus. 4 days later, only 4 days later, he reversed his position on the matter, allowing a devolution of authority to conferences and institutions. The result was anarchy in the Power Five as the ACC, Big 12, and SEC chose to begin football at various times in September, while the Big 10 and Pac-12 delayed the start of the sport to late October and early November, respectively. Nearly as shameful was the deference of the NCAA and its members to Congress in the framing of NIL policy, a forbearance as timorous as a quick kick on third down in the era of the single wing. If you're not familiar with the single wing, look that one up on Google as well. Notwithstanding the establishment of a bubble for the NCAA basketball tournament in 2021, the association has abdicated its plenary leadership of major college athletics. The Power Five should reconstitute under new governing authority. By dint of its advocacy for amateurism, the NCAA should continue as the governing authority for Divisions 3, 2, the FCS, and perhaps the Group of Five. In conclusion, in 2019, college football observed its 150th anniversary season with the full participation of all colleges and universities that ordinarily field a team. Soon after, the nation and the world were gripped by a global pandemic. As we emerge from that, the 250th anniversary of American independence is upon us. In addition to the Declaration of Independence, another intellectual contribution to the new country was made by Adam Smith when he published The Wealth of Nations, also in 1776. Smith emphasized that the invisible hand of self-interest would stimulate a market economy. Nearly 40 years have passed since leading universities sought and won economic freedom from the NCAA monopoly on regular season football media rights. These universities have prospered immensely from their freedom. Today, elite college athletes are fighting to overcome the collectivism of the NCAA and its member institutions in order to enjoy the fruits from a free market. And with that, the presentation concludes. We don't have questions in a virtual conference. But my thanks to the University of South Carolina for putting on the College Sport Research Institute. And we look for that day. We hope for that day when, amid the palmettos and the new buildings that fold seamlessly in with the old buildings, we can meet again in Columbia, a place where I have attended CSRI twice and the North American Society once, and also had a faculty residency. And until that day, in the words from the lyric line of the alma mater, here's a Health Carolina, forever to thee. And with that, we conclude.